Hello everybody, this is Martin here with another Legacy video. This is going to be a deck tech on the Food Chain deck. The Food Chain deck is a combo slash mid-range control deck. I'll be walking through the different parts of the deck. This deck, just to get you an overall sort of idea of the deck, is a deck that can either combo off to win almost on the spot with Food Chain combined with Misthollow Griffin to create infinite mana, and then cast a Tidespout Tyrant and recast the Griffins to bounce all your opponent's permanents. And it can help. You can find the Tyrant by making a million Genesis Hydra and reveal all the cards in your deck and put permanent into play. That also leaves you with a really big Hydra. So that would usually win the game. Other options can include like Emrakul, stuff like that. Alternatively, we have the choice to just play a regular game of Magic with Deathrite Shaman, Baleful Strix, just regular grindy creatures. The Griffins can also just be used as beaters. We run some removal and Abrupt Decay. I've chosen to also run Murderous Cut. And we run Force of Will. Alright, so let's begin with the mana. This deck wants to run a decent amount of both fetch lands to fill up your graveyard for delve spells and your Deathrite Shaman, and also duels. It's a 3-color deck. It's a bug deck, and as such, we need like access across the board. We need the 3 duels, the Bayou, the Trop, and the Underground Sea. You could also be looking at running some number of basic lands. I've chosen to run a swamp after a lot of deliberation and discussion with other people as the only basic. And basically you want to be able to function off of a Deathrite Shaman. So you want to be able to, against like a wasteland deck, you make swamp into Deathrite. Or fetch a swamp, get Deathrite. And that allows you to activate the most relevant of the 2 color required abilities on the Deathrite, and to make mana by exiling other lands in the graveyard. I used to run the constellation of Swamp, Forest, Island to be covered and be able to always hardcast a Griffin, like in theory. But I found that in a 3-color deck, basics become something of a trap. You get a hand with like a fetch and an island, and you have all these like green black elements in your deck. Like you really want to be able to Abrupt Decay all the time, and island fetch land doesn't allow you to do that, and island swamp doesn't allow you to do that at all. It allows you to maybe cast a Baleful Strix, but then you don't have access to green mana, and so you're forced to sort of, in that situation, probably play your island and then fetch like a Bayou maybe, and then you're even more vulnerable to a wasteland than you would have been if that island had been, say, a tropical island. You go tropical island, fetch Bayou, or fetch Underground Sea, and then you'd have access to 2 colors even after a wasteland. So that's a little bit about that. You might also notice that I have a Savannah. That is in the deck to play white spells out of the sideboard, but I'll get to that. Okay, so just want to move on from talking about the lands and talk about the combo. So yeah, the combo consists of Food Chain. This is an old card. It basically, like it says, exile a creature, add X mana of any one color to your mana pool, where X is the exiled creature's converted mana cost +1. And it has the caveat that this mana can only be spent to cast creature spells. Now, when Avacyn Restored was released, it had this card, Misthollow Griffin. And that Misthollow Griffin has a nice clause that says it can be cast from exile. Like 2 and blue, and you get a 3/3 flyer. That's really not very exciting. But the fact that it can be cast from exile combines with Food Chain to create infinite mana that then may only be used to cast creature spells. If you have a Food Chain in play, and you have a Griffin in play or in exile, then you need to get it into play, and then you exile it once into the Food Chain. You get 5 mana because you get X, which is the converted mana cost plus 1. It costs 4, so you get 5. You choose blue, and now it's in exile, and you have 5 blue mana in your mana pool, so you cast it again, and then you exile it again for another 5. You had 1 floating, so now you have 6, and that you repeat that. And you get it basically infinite mana of all colors, and then we just have to find a way to win. Now, previously I would play Emrakul and creatures that would tutor up Emrakul, but like since a while back that kind of changed, and now the win condition is Tidespout Tyrant. Tidespout Tyrant is blue, so he pitches to a Force of Will. And the thing is, you want tutors to find your creature, your win creature, and you want the tutors to also be creatures. Back in the day, we would also play a card called Fierce Empath. And Fierce Empath, let me just find that for you. Here, Fierce Empath costs 3, and when it enters the battlefield, it has a trigger that lets you find a creature with converted mana cost 6 or greater and put it into your hand. So basically, if you had infinite mana, you could play a Fierce Empath essentially for free, and it would trigger, and you'd find Emrakul, and then you would cast Emrakul from your hand, triggering the get an extra turn trigger that Emrakul has, which is really nice. The thing about Fierce Empath, though, is it's kind of a crappy card when there's no Food Chain in play. It's like a 1/1 for 3 that lets you tutor up just a brick in your hand that you can't do anything with, if that brick is Emrakul. However, when running Fierce Empath, Emrakul would get the nod over the Tyrant, because the Tyrant doesn't actually win us the game on the spot. It bounces all your opponent's permanents, and then we pass him the turn. And there are actually corner cases where like a Storm deck will be able to just replay its land and then win on the spot. Or a Burn deck just needs to, like if we're at low life, they just need to draw a Burn spell. And so there are situations where that is relevant. But because Fierce Empath is not good enough, I think, to run in the deck, we have exchanged it with Genesis Hydra. Genesis Hydra lets us cast it for X, and when we cast it, we get a trigger that says reveal the top X cards of our library, and choose a non-land permanent with converted mana cost X or less among those cards, and put it directly into play. So if we have infinite mana, we can make an infinitely large, or X is infinitely large. Let's just say 1,000. That makes us cast 1,000 Genesis Hydra, which in and of itself is pretty, awesome. And then the trigger goes on to the stack as we are casting it, and we get to look through our entire library. And if Emrakul was the kill at this point, we would just put Emrakul into play and nothing else would happen because we're not casting Emrakul. So we're passing to our opponent, and they have all their permanents in play, and that's not very good. Like they can, if they get the turn, they can play like a Sorcerer Speed Sport Sweeper, or something like that. or yeah, just not, that's not where we want to be. So since we're playing the Hydra, we want something that matters instantly, and we get the Tidespout Tyrant. With this and with the Tidespout Tyrant, Griffins, and Hydra, we also basically get to just draw our entire deck, because we can make Hydra, make Hydra, sorry, find Tyrant, exile a Griffin, play it, use the Tyrant's ability to bounce the Hydra, play the Hydra again for our entire library, then get a Baleful Strix, play that, draw a card, bounce the Strix with the Hydra, by exiling with the Griffin with the Tyrant, and so on. So we can just draw our entire library, draw all our Force of Wills, leave like a card, and pass the turn, and then it's gonna be, yeah, it's game over. Like in a vast majority of the time. The reason, just to finish up on this, that we want to play the Hydra over the Empath is that the Hydra is actually a really good card, or not a really good card, but it's a real card outside of having Food Chain in play. We can play this with 5 or 6 mana and make X4 3 or 4, and if we just make it 3 or larger and we are lucky enough to hit a Food Chain, the Food Chain is put directly into play. It doesn't go onto the stack, so it can't be countered. So you can get it around like Spell Pierce or a Force or whatever. That's really nice, but also just not even hitting the Food Chain. If we spend 5 mana and cast this, and we look at the top 3 cards, and one of them is a Baleful Strix or a Deathrite Shaman, we get 2 creatures for 1, and then the Hydra is a 3/3. And if we have more mana, it's a 4/4 or 5/5, and that matters. That's a relevant creature, and because this deck will often get into the mid to late game, we will also often have a lot of mana. So this is just infinitely more relevant in those spots than the Fierce Empath. And that's a shame, because I love the Fierce Empath. I played with it many a time and made many cool plays with that and Grizzlebrand and Food Chain and all this stuff. But ultimately, I think this is more reasonable to play. And yeah, the Tyrant is a blue card as well, which will randomly matter. I mean, obviously, it sucks to pitch it to Force of Will, because that basically means we won't be able to combo off, but we can still quite handily win. Also, like, some of the time, because this is essentially like a 3-card combo, and that will sometimes, or rather often, not come together for us. Just having the Food Chain and then some number of Griffins is really powerful as well. With the Food Chain in play, the Griffins get pseudo vigilance, so you attack with them, and then in your second main phase you exile them and just replay them. So that's really effective. Alright, moving on from the combo engine room, and we will look at the cantrips / card selection / tutor spells. Yeah, Brainstorm, fairly self-explanatory. We have a lot of fetch lands, we have a lot of shuffle mechanics, so just really good at helping us find what we need. Ponder, I really like to run some number of ponders. I wish I could squeeze in more than 2 at various stages. Ponder has been Sylvan Library. I have been up running 3 ponders. Just the way the deck is constructed right now, I just think 2 is like the maximum number I've been able to find a room for. Then we have Dig Through Time. Dig Through Time is obviously a great sort of way to generate card advantage and also find specific cards you need at various points in time. And in a deck like this, that might include finding one of the combo pieces we're missing. It might include finding like an Abrupt Decay to answer a threat, or like a Force of Will. And the Delve mechanic plays really well with the Misthollow Griffins, in that if a Misthollow Griffin is in our graveyard, we can use it to pay for the Delve cost, and then have it exiled and ready to be played again. So that, I mean, sometimes we are taxing our graveyard quite a bit. I'm running these two Delve cards, the Dig Through Times, then I'm running a Murderous Cut and a Tasigur. So 4 Delve cards, I think, is just about the limit of what we can allow ourselves to run. And 3 might even be more correct, but yeah, at this stage I'm running with 4. And then we have, which is what is probably like one of my favorite cards in the deck, which is Manipulate Fate. Yeah, it's a blue sorcery for blue and 1, and you get to search your library for 3 cards and exile them. And then we shuffle, and we actually also get to draw a card. So I won't make too many guesses as to what this was originally designed to do. Just thin out your deck, I guess. Remove cards that you no longer like need at a point in the game or whatever. And it cantrips. With Misthollow Griffin, it becomes a rather sort of absurd card advantage effect. You pay a blue and 1, and then you search out 3 Misthollow Griffins and you exile them. And now they don't exactly count for 3 cards in your hand, but sometimes they do, and sometimes a bit less, because obviously you can't pitch them to force, you can't shuffle them away with a Brainstorm. But for a lot of intent and purpose, they could just as well be in your hand. So this is almost like blue and 1, search your library for 3 cards, put them in your hand, then shuffle your library, and then draw a card, which is just crazy. This is a card that you can also use to bait, because I think, like, especially now that the deck is a bit more on people's radar, people will know what's up when you cast this. And in a lot of cases, they will absolutely need to counter this, because you having these 3/3 flyers ready to go is like more than a lot of decks can actually really handle. Like, they don't get Abrupt Decayed, they can get Swords to Plowshare, but that's a really bad deal. And they can come in, they can trade with the Delver, and they can just fly in over their guys on the ground. It's actually not too shabby. So a lot of times people will really want to force of will this or counter this. So if you already have like a Griffin or 2 in hand, then you can just bait out with this, and it'll usually do the trick. Okay, so this next pile of cards are like the mid-rangey, grindy part of the deck. Yeah, Baleful Strix. This deck has always wanted some number of convert a mana cost 2 creatures that you could sort of chain into the food chain. So you could go turn 1 mana dork, turn 2 food chain, exile the mana dork for another mana dork, exile that mana dork for Strix, exile the Strix, and then eventually like get to the Griffin mana. At one point, this was a Wall of Blossoms, which also that's an 0/4 wall for green and 1, and it just draws a card when it enters the battlefield. Being 2 colors is the only thing that sort of speaks against Strix. Every other department is just vastly superior. I think it's a good way to look at how many Strixes you should be running and how good Strix is like how many Tarmogoyfs are running around. If there aren't that many, if Tarmogoyf is instead like young Pyromancer in your current meta, then maybe Strix. Maybe you can look at cutting some number of Baleful Strix. But it's just like, yeah, it's a super efficient card, replaces itself and trades with their biggest guy, and can also be used to ramp the food chain. By the way, with this sort of compartmentalization I've made of the deck here, it's not really like, sometimes the Hydra becomes part of the mid-range plan, and sometimes the food chain becomes part of the mid-range plan. Oh, sorry, not the food chain, the Griffin. Deathrite Shaman and a Griffin can chump block and gain you life, sort of looping. So you put the Misthollow Griffin in front of, say, like a big Tarmogoyf, and the Griffin dies. And then at the end of your opponent's turn, you exile it with Deathrite Shaman to gain 2 life, and you recast it, and that can sort of stave off attackers until you draw something like that can help you just push the game towards being aggressive. You'll notice I have a Birds of Paradise as my 5th mana guy. I really like having 5 because it means you're able to come out better in Deathrite mirrors, and also just like this deck really wants to have a mana dork on turn 1 if it can. That's really important. I've played with this as a Noble Hierarch, but I'm still a little bit torn because I really like the Hierarch. I really like just randomly having Exalted Matter swinging with a 4/4 Griffin, or like 2/2 Strixes. But with the deck running as many black cards, or cards with black mana symbols in them as it is, I prefer to have the birds because, yeah, just it's rainbow mana. I like to run 4 sort of removal cards, and that could be 4 Abrupt Decays, but I've just really liked this card, Murderous Cut, since it was released. I really like how it just doesn't care about the converted mana cost. It can be countered, so that's unfortunate, but it can like randomly get you out of a spot against like an opponent, like a Reanimator deck that stumbles with careful study into, say, Grave Titan or Tidespout Tyrant or whatever. If it's not Gristlebrand, it can take care of Tasigur, and he's seeing more play now. It's just a bit of an alternative way to remove a creature, and it also effectively it costs 1 mana less because you delve the 4, so that's sometimes relevant. And yeah, delving, as we already mentioned, is occasionally really sweet with the Griffin in the graveyard. The deck needs and wants removal because we want to be able to get into the mid and late game, and we want to be able to answer their mid-range threats. It's really important against decks like Death and Taxes and Delver decks and decks like that, and also obviously against Miracles. It's really nice. I'm trying the one-off Tasigur and liking him so far. I'm not completely convinced that he belongs in the deck, but he's so far been good, so I'm keeping him there. Okay, moving on to the last little column of spells here. We have the protection spells. And Force of Will is obviously, it probably doesn't need an introduction, but Force of Will with Misthollow Griffin is a special treat because then Force of Will actually stops being card disadvantage. And that's always been the thing with Force of Will, right? It's an extremely powerful effect, but you trade off a card. So you 2-for-1 yourself, but the trade is often worth it if it's like a show and tell or an infernal tutor or something like that, like a powerful game-winning effect. But then against all the other decks, 2-for-1ing yourselves, like against all non-combo decks, it can be a bit problematic. I mean, and that's where like not losing the card is just incredibly sweet. I'll also say that when I play this deck in paper, I have a Misdirection as well as sort of my 5th Force of Will. But Misdirection is currently like $110 on Magic Online or something like that. So I have been too much of a cheapskate to go out and buy it, and I'm currently sitting on my hands waiting for it to be reprinted at some stage and drop in price. But Misdirection obviously is the same clause as Force of Will. You exile a blue card in your hand, and Misdirection is just a really sweet card. You get to, like, initially I wanted it to misdirect Abrupt Decay off of our food chain, because food chain is our combo engine and it costs 3 and it's a permanent, so it has a big fat Abrupt Decay bullseye on it. But eventually it just occurred to me that Misdirection is just such a jack of all trades kind of card, and sometimes it'll suck and won't do, like, your opponent will cast a Jace and you'll be looking at your Misdirection and be like, oh, what is this? But misdirecting a Hymn to Torok is obviously great. Misdirecting a lightning bolt off of your Deathrite can sometimes just be incredibly effective. Especially if you get to kill one of their guys, but even just to save your Deathrite and deal 3 damage to your opponent. So make no mistake, I would always play one. I would find room for one Misdirection if I had it online, and I always do that in paper. Okay. So now I would like to talk about the sideboard. Alright, so let's talk about the sideboard. Here's where the white splash comes in the shape of the Meddling Mages. I just want to talk about those first. Basically, of the different archetypes in Legacy and among the top decks, fast combo has always been sort of a bane of this deck. Storm combo is a real problem. Sneak and show and tell decks used to be alright. That was when we ran main deck like Emrakul, Grizzlebrand, and Aether Snipe, but not anymore. And so those decks are kind of rough as well. So I think it makes sense to really hedge against combo. Against the fair decks, we're rather alright in the main deck. We get to bring in like an extra Abrupt Decay, a couple of Disfigure. I bring these in against, like relevant creature decks, elves especially as well. Here we got Golgari Charm as well for elves, Death and Taxes. So as you can see, the sideboard is pretty much constructed to combat combo decks and just to have a little bit against graveyard-based combo decks especially, but then also just to be able to do something against the fair decks, to improve your game against the fair decks. I think having, I want the Flusterstorms definitely, because we only have the 4 Force of Will in the main deck, and to be able to have some more counter magic against Storm and Show and Tell is really relevant. Against those decks, the discard spells are also very good. And obviously the Meddling Mages. And then we round that up with the Surgical and Grafdigger's Cage against Reanimator Dredge and also Storm in part. Then we have the Meddling Mages. I spoke about those. Excellent to name, Show and Tell. Especially now that the Omni tell decks, no and tell or whatever you want to call them, they don't really run a backup plan to show and tell most of the time now. There was a time when they ran like Dream Halls, and so Meddling Mage and Show and Tell wouldn't stop them if they just played Dream Halls and then played Omniscience. But now they seem to be all running only for Show and Tell, relying on Dig Through Time and stuff to get them, or Burning Wish to get Show and Tell out of the sideboard. And so Meddling Mage is really good there. Against Storm, Meddling Mage is also fine. I think there are better hate bears against Storm, because Storm has different key cards. If I'm playing against Storm and I don't know anything about their hand, I'm happy to name Infernal Tutor with this. But situationally, it might be more correct to name something else. I considered, like, I think against Storm, Aether Sworn Canonist is just strictly better than Meddling Mage, but the Canonist is not necessarily that good against Show and Tell, although pretty handy in the Omnitel matchup. But Aether Sworn Canonist is very detrimental to our own plan, and while I will usually board some number of combo pieces out against, like our combo pieces out when we're playing against combo decks and go revert into a more of a control deck role, it still just irks me to basically completely shut off our own combo with a hate piece for theirs. I think that's basically it here. I think moving on from talking about the sideboard, I'd like to talk about some of the different matchups, because that might also make sense when you're looking at looking at the sideboard make more sense. So basically, yeah, fast combo is not what we most prefer to meet game one. Like, I might just have a bit of a hoodoo on me about Storm because I've lost so much to it when this deck was more of a combo deck than it is now. But even now, with more sort of a mid-range beatdown plan, our clock is still horrendously slow, like exceptionally slow, way too slow to hope to beat combo and to hope to beat Storm. We basically have in the main deck 4 Force of Will and 4 Deathrite Shaman, and most of the time that's not going to be enough to get there against Storm. But after the sideboard, with our whole package with the Meddling Mages, the discard spells, and the Flusterstorms and the graveyard interaction, we can actually put up quite a fight. And I think it's still over the 3 games, Storm is probably favored, but only slightly, because we become more favorite, the more favored deck after sideboard, in my opinion. Because to fight Storm, you really want to fight them on several axes, so just bringing in more counter spells and some discard is not sufficient. But if you also add to that hate, like a permanent hate in the form of hate bears, Meddling Mage here, and also some graveyard hate incidentally, then you are looking to be set up to have a really good chance. So fast combo, yeah, not our favorite, but definitely manageable now with the white splash. Other mid-range decks, I think we are quite well set up. Shardless might still have an edge on us because they have Ancestral Vision, but we can put up a fight against Shardless for sure. I feel like Jund is a bit of a tough one because they have, like, Tarmogoyf against us is usually going to be pretty big because we have enchantments, 4 of them. And between their discard and Abrupt Decays, there's a very real chance of a food chain finding its way to the graveyard during a game against Jund. And Baleful Strix means artifacts as well, so Goyf is usually going to be like 5/6 or maybe even like a 6/7, and they also have planeswalkers. So yeah, we actually get put on under quite a bit of pressure. We have removal for their Goyfs and we have the Strix, but they have so much. Like especially if it's punishing Jund, punishing fire is actually quite a bit of a problem. And then they also have the decays for the food chain, so it's not impossible at all, and it's not like a really bad matchup, but it's not one that I'm terribly pleased to be pitched up against. The same actually goes for Maverick, because they can Zenith for Kasali Pride Mage to put a real dent in our food chain plan. They put our mana under pressure with the Wastelands and Knight of the Reliquary. They just have they kind of overload our Abrupt Decays. We don't have enough removal to really keep up with the annoying creatures. Like they have Deathrite Shamans, they have Thalia, and like usually we don't, like especially when not running more basics, we don't really hold well to a Knight of the Reliquary on tapping. So I like to bring in Decay, the number 4 against those decks, of course. Against Maverick, probably Golgari Charm, although they aren't that overloaded on X1s, but you know they have Mother Runes and Thalia, so I think it makes sense. Against the Tempo decks, the Delver decks, it kind of depends what variant. If they're running a deck with lightning bolts or a deck with access to red, I think that makes it a bit more difficult. Lightning bolt is just more effective removal against us than Abrupt Decay because it can nug our birds, our Misthollow Griffins, as well as pretty much everything else. And Decay can't hit the Griffin. Also, they get to bring in Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast out of the board, which is also somewhat of a problem. So yeah, basically like the faster Delver decks, like the slower Delver decks, and I guess I'm mainly thinking about Bug Delver or Team America. I think it's actually, ever since we took our foot off the gas in terms of the combo and focused more on the mid-range plan, I think Bug Delver actually became quite a decent matchup for us. Once we get into the mid to late game and start being able to resolve Misthollow Griffins, then it becomes favorable for us, especially if we're running the 4 Strix. And like after sideboarding there, just and that goes for any Delver deck. I'll bring in the Disfigures, the 4th Abrupt Decay. Yeah, the last matchup, I think, well, not the last, the second to last matchup I'll touch on is Burn, and Burn is a pretty nasty matchup for us. We're heavy on the non-basics, so Price of Progress can just destroy us. Our clock and our combo isn't that fast, so they'll usually be able to race us. We only have like in the main the 4 force to snag their important spells. Like I think if we had Spell Pierce or something, just being able to trade 1 for 1 on the stack with like a Lightning Bolt or a Lava Spike can actually be excellent, but we don't have those choices, and they just put too much pressure on us, and we have to pin our hopes on getting like either Deathrite Shaman online and removing their creatures and being able to protect Deathrite Shaman and then eventually winning, or to have counter magic and a fast route to a combo victory, to be able to use counter magic to prolong our life and then combo them off. But we're pretty big underdogs, I think, and it doesn't really, the way I've set up the sideboard, it doesn't really improve much for games 2 and 3. So if you're expecting a meta with a lot of burn, I wouldn't be overly excited about playing this deck. Okay, so the last matchup I want to focus on is Miracles, and I think Miracles is actually a pretty sweet matchup for this deck. I think Miracles wants to always Miracles looks to remove all of our threats all the time, so you need to pace yourself and not overextend into them. But the fact that Misthollow Griffin can be cast from exile, and the fact that we can tutor up 3 Misthollow Griffins with Manipulate Fate, is just really big game against Miracles. And we incidentally also just have like Abrupt Decay for their counterbalance to make that sort of not that good. Yeah, if Miracles beat us, it's usually either through Jace establishing, like, if we can't answer a Jace, then they can establish control. But I think even a resolved Jace is not unbeatable, because especially if we can get like some number of Griffins online, have them in exile, have them in play, have Deathrite Shaman to exile them if they get blasted or the likes, and Terminus will put the Griffins back into our library, making otherwise redundant Manipulate Fates live again. Genesis Hydra is excellent. She's an excellent creature against Miracles, because we'll often get into the late game. We'll have a lot of mana. It'll trigger and hopefully hit another creature, and they can't counter that other creature entering. And even just like a 2/2 Hydra is relevant, like, against Miracles, because they will need to answer it. They can't just forever have creatures beating them down. Watch out for like a quick end of turn Entreat the Angels. That'll just end you. Be mindful of that. And usually, like, save your Force of Will for Jace, or for like one of their bomby spells. Don't necessarily use it to win counter wars over your stuff unless you really feel like you can just slam dunk win. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you will, if you choose to play this deck, I hope you'll enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. Alright, see you guys around.